The story begins with a man named Tenghui. He was once an MMA champion who held the title across Asia. However, his career fell apart after a fight with his coach landed him in prison. Now, at the age of 43, Tenghui struggles to make a living by running a sand mining business. One night, while delivering sand, his truck was ambushed by a roadblock of stones. Realizing it was a robbery, Tenghui prepared to defend himself. To his surprise, the robbers turned out to be children. During the struggle, Tenghui was struck with a rock and knocked unconscious. The next day, after receiving treatment at the hospital, Tenghui's friend and project manager, Wang Feng, informed him that the workers were threatening to strike. They hadn't been paid in 6 months, and sand orders had become increasingly rare. If the situation continued, the business would face bankruptcy. To save his business, Tenghui decided to approach his old friend, Jing Fu, to borrow money. Jing Fu, now a successful factory owner, listened to Tenghui's struggles as they smoked together. Jing Fu then offered to lend him money but proposed a condition. They would partner to open an MMA training club. Jing Fu explained that the sports industry was booming and promised that an investment in this field would be highly profitable. Tenghui would handle recruiting and training the students, while Jing Fu would take care of the funding. Desperate for money, Tenghui agreed. The next morning, while Tenghui was sorting out payments for his employees at the sand warehouse, Wang Feng arrived with a group of potential students as requested. Seeing the group of timid-looking children, Tenghui was shocked. Nevertheless, he quickly came up with a plan. Later that day, Tenghui, Wang Feng, and a few workers pretended to deliver sand, setting out to capture the children who had robbed him earlier. After successfully rounding up 8 kids, Tenghui treated them kindly despite his business motives. During a meal, he threatened to report them to the police unless they agreed to become his students. Tenghui explained that training in martial arts and earning an honest living was far better than stealing. Eventually, the children reluctantly agreed. During their conversation, one of the kids, Mahu, confessed that none of them had ever attended school and didn't know how to read or write. Hearing this, Tenghui fell silent, feeling a sense of sympathy. Later, at his office, as he gazed at his old gold medal, memories of his past resurfaced. That night, the children stayed at the warehouse. It was their first time sleeping on comfortable mattresses, and they wished they could stay there forever. Though they knew Tenghui was using them for his business, they couldn't help but feel grateful for the opportunity. 1 week later, the big day arrived. The opening ceremony was set, and after ensuring everything was ready, Tenghui waited for Jing Fu to arrive. Hours passed, but there was no sign of Jing Fu. When he called, Tenghui learned that Jing Fu had been arrested for selling counterfeit medicine. Visiting him in prison, Tenghui demanded that Jing Fu take responsibility. Without his financial support, how would the club survive? However, Jing Fu casually replied that all his money had been confiscated by the authorities. He suggested Tenghui dissolve the club, reasoning that it wasn't worth the trouble since the students were just poor, insignificant children. That evening, back at the mining site, Tenghui announced to the children that the club was officially closed. Shocked and upset, one of the children, Su Mu, begged to stay and continue learning martial arts. Su Mu even promised to be on his best behavior. However, with a heavy heart, Tenghui was forced to send them all away. Soon after, while cleaning up, another mine owner arrived and informed Tenghui that a group of children had been robbing his mining area. At first, Tenghui pretended not to know anything, but the children had claimed to be his students during the robbery. Stunned, Tenghui could not defend himself and was beaten unconscious. To make matters worse, his stock of sand was taken as compensation. The next day, Tenghui decided to take the children back to their families. Near their home, Mahu and Su Mu walked the rest of the way on foot while Wang Feng and the others waited in the truck. When they reached the house, Tenghui was moved by the sight of Yitong, the older sister of Su Mu and Mahu, who was paralyzed. While talking, Yitong apologized for their dire situation. Apparently, their parents had abandoned them long ago, and they lived in extreme poverty. Even having potatoes to eat felt like a blessing. Trembling, Yitong promised to repay Tenghui for the damages. But instead of taking anything, Tenghui gave her some money and quietly left. The following morning, back at the mining site, Tenghui gathered the children. He presented them with an agreement, explaining that they could stay and eat for free, but they must never steal again. They also had to commit to disciplined martial arts training to earn an honest living. Without hesitation, the children eagerly stamped their fingerprints on the agreement. That afternoon, Tenghui visited an old friend, Ong Li, at his bar. Over a cigarette, Tenghui proposed a partnership. Since Ong Li's bar had been struggling, Tenghui suggested hosting staged MMA fights to entertain customers without anyone getting hurt. Confident in his students' ability to put on a good show, Tenghui convinced Ong Li to agree to the idea. The next day, after practice, Tenghui showed the children a video of professional MMA athletes fighting and explained that their matches would be similar but staged. To demonstrate, he asked two children to come forward and act out a fight. However, their acting was poor, so Tenghui kicked Ma Hu to illustrate the right expression. While Ma Hu winced in pain, Tenghui told the others to mimic his reaction. He explained that acting wasn't just about punches and kicks, it required mastering expressions as well. A few days later, after more practice, Tenghui took the children to Ong Li's bar. That night, Ma Hu and Su Mu were scheduled to perform. However, their movements looked stiff and fake, leaving the audience disappointed. Frustrated, Tenghui yelled at them to fight seriously. After the performance, both Ma Hu and Su Mu were bruised and battered. While getting a massage, Su Mu confessed a dream of becoming a real athlete like Tenghui. Su Mu hoped to win championships and travel the world, imagining taking Yitong anywhere she wished to go. Su Mu asked if such a dream could ever come true. At the same time, Tenghui remained silent, lost in thought. The following day, to boost morale, Tenghui bought the children new shoes. They were overjoyed. Day by day, they trained and performed, gaining experience and confidence. As the martial arts club grew in popularity, Tenghui received an offer to perform at a prestigious bar in a major city. Without hesitation, he accepted. One night, during a performance by Ma Hu and Su Mu, a gang of troublemakers showed up. They ordered the show to stop, claiming they knew the fights were fake. When Ma Hu and Su Mu tried to resist, the gang surrounded them. Meanwhile, upon hearing the commotion, Tenghui rushed to their aid. Cornered and outnumbered, they were saved just in time by Wang Feng, who distracted the gang long enough for them to escape. As a result of the incident, Wang Feng and the gang members were arrested. The next day, Tenghui visited Wang Feng in custody. Apologizing, Tenghui promised to work on getting Wang Feng released. He also admitted that their stage fights had been exposed, and the MMA show business was now shut down. Concerned, Wang Feng suggested that Tenghui train the children to become real athletes. He pointed out that Ma Hu and Su Mu had real potential, believing one of them could even become a champion. This gave Tenghui much to think about. The following day, Tenghui returned to his mother's home for the first time in years. His mother, now severely senile, no longer recognized him. Seeing her in this state filled Tenghui with deep sorrow. Memories of the day his career fell apart 10 years ago came flooding back. In the past, after winning a championship, he was disqualified for using doping. Tenghui's mother had begged the officials to retest him, convinced of his innocence, but the decision was final. Enraged by the outcome, Tenghui blamed his coach and attacked him, leading to his imprisonment. Reflecting on the sins of his past, Tenghui wept with regret and apologized to his mother. Determined to atone for his mistakes, Tenghui decided to dedicate the rest of his life to training children to become professional athletes. The scene then showing 10 years later, at the airport, Tenghui greeted Ma Hu and Su Mu. Both were now adults, competing in the National MMA Championship. During the drive home, they enthusiastically shared stories about their matches and how they advanced to the semifinals. Listening to their journey, Tenghui felt a deep sense of pride. When they arrived at the club, Tenghui was surprised to find many impoverished families pleading for their children to be trained in martial arts. Happily, Tenghui welcomed them. Despite the club's growth into a major institution, most of its students came from underprivileged backgrounds, and Tenghui never charged any fees. He also provided free meals and accommodations. Beyond martial arts training, he hired tutors to ensure the children could also pursue their education. After celebrating Ma Hu's and Su Mu's success in the semifinals, Tenghui visited a private school. He met with the principal, pleading for the school to admit the children from his club without charging fees. However, the principal refused, stating that at the very least, Tenghui needed to pay the building fees. Disheartened, Tenghui left the school. That evening, back at the club, Tenghui saw Su Mu still training. Approaching him, Tenghui listened as Su Mu expressed his confidence in reaching the finals and winning the gold medal. Su Mu then thanked Tenghui for transforming his life. Deeply moved, Tenghui decided to spar with Su Mu, revisiting the joy of training after a long time. A few days later, as the semifinals were about to begin, Tenghui received troubling news. An old video of Ma Hu and Su Mu performing stage fights as children had gone viral on YouTube. Public backlash forced the organizers to temporarily remove their names from the competition roster. Desperate, Tenghui met with the head of the committee, pleading for his students to be allowed to compete. However, due to the intense public outcry, the head had no choice but to decline. He handed Tenghui a business card for another club, suggesting the only way for his students to compete was to transfer to a different organization. The controversy surrounding Tenghui's past exploitation of underage children continued to escalate, eventually prompting the authorities to temporarily shut down his club for investigation. Left with no other choice, Tenghui accepted the situation. A few days later, determined to give his students a chance at the championship, Tenghui secretly approached Xingyu, the owner of another club. Xingyu assured Tenghui that he would train Ma Hu and Su Mu wholeheartedly. After negotiating, Tenghui reluctantly agreed to hand over his two talented students to Xingyu. Shortly after, Tenghui took the children out for a meal. While eating, Ma Hu expressed his gratitude, saying that even though the club had been shut down, no matter what happened, they would always stand by Tenghui. To them, Tenghui was like a father. However, in the middle of their conversation, Tenghui revealed that he had already signed a contract transferring Ma Hu and Su Mu to a new club. As for the other children, they were free to return to their homes. Hearing this, Su Mu questioned why Tenghui made the decision without consulting them, arguing that they also had the right to choose. Tenghui, believing he was acting in their best interest, became upset. He firmly declared that the club was officially dissolved as of that night. Holding back his sorrow, Tenghui told the children to leave and never show up in front of him again. 1 year later, Tenghui had established a silk factory. Part of the profits from his business was donated to support the education of underprivileged children, particularly his former students. One morning, as Tenghui was about to visit a school, Wang Feng informed him that a journalist was asking to interview him about the viral video from the previous year. Tenghui declined, saying the issue was outdated and there was nothing more to discuss. For him, ensuring that poor children could attend school and that his new business thrived was more than enough. That afternoon, Tenghui visited Yitong at her home. Thanks to his help, Yitong was now living a better life. She shared that Su Mu often sent letters. Initially, Tenghui was happy to read them, knowing his former student had become a successful athlete. However, noticing that all the stamps were identical, he realized Su Mu was lying. Curious, Tenghui decided to visit the address on the letters to meet him. On his way, Tenghui got into an accident, colliding with a car in front of him that had suddenly stopped. Confused, he discovered that the car was being robbed, and the robber was Ma Hu. After chasing Ma Hu down, Tenghui confronted him. With a heavy heart, Ma Hu confessed that he was forced to turn to robbery again. Ever since leaving Tenghui's club, he and Su Mu had no future. Now, Su Mu was bedridden with a severe knee injury, unable to walk. To pay for his treatment, Ma Hu resorted to crime, no matter the risk. Hearing this, Tenghui's heart broke. He felt a deep sense of guilt and disappointment. The next day, Tenghui visited Su Mu and saw his devastating condition, lying helpless on a mattress. Holding back his tears, Tenghui tried to remain strong. Su Mu, however, couldn't contain his emotions and wept in shame. With a steady voice, Tenghui informed him that Ma Hu had been arrested the previous night and was now in prison. Overcome with emotion, Su Mu finally opened up about everything. He revealed that when he joined Xingyu's club, Xingyu forced him to take doping drugs. When Su Mu refused, Xing Yu beat him severely, causing the knee injury that left him crippled. Furious after hearing this, Tenghui resolved to confront Xing Yu immediately. Tenghui confronted Xing Yu alone, but ended up being beaten. Xing Yu coldly reminded him that Ma Hu and Su Mu were bound by contracts, and that Tenghui had no right to interfere. If he wanted to take them back, he would have to pay a penalty fee. Before throwing him out, Xing Yu stomped on Tenghui's shoulder, breaking it, just as he had done to Su Mu. The following week, Tenghui accepted an invitation for a televised interview. During the broadcast, the audience jeered at him, calling him worthless. The host bluntly asked about Tenghui's true intentions in taking in and training the children. The public believed he had exploited and deceived them for personal gain. Tenghui admitted that he had indeed deceived them, but he explained it was to give them a better future, to stop them from stealing, and to help them become champions who could win gold medals. He asked the audience if they had ever cared about those street kids that always been treated as outcasts. No one had ever helped them go to school or even bothered to feed them. His words silenced the audience, leaving them deep in thought. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Su Mu, Wang Feng, and Yi Tong watched the interview before Su Mu's knee surgery. At that moment, Su Mu broke into tears. Tenghui's words resonated deeply, reflecting the silent cries of every street child. Months later, after recovering from surgery, Su Mu visited Ma Hu in prison. Seeing his brother walking again, Ma Hu was overjoyed. Su Mu explained that thanks to Tenghui's viral interview, the public had rallied behind them. Their contracts with the club had been terminated, and Xing Yu's wrongdoings, including forcing students to use doping, had been exposed, leading to the club's closure. Now, they were completely free and could return to Tenghui as they once were. Overwhelmed, Ma Hu tearfully urged Su Mu to prove to Tenghui that they could become champions and make him proud. 2 years later, after numerous matches and championship victories, Su Mu had become a renowned MMA fighter. That day, Su Mu faced a world champion from Brazil. Unexpectedly, Tenghui and Yi Tong were in the audience to cheer him on. As the fight began, the first round was intense. Su Mu was repeatedly struck, finding himself cornered. Fortunately, the bell rang, signaling the end of the round. Elsewhere, Wang Feng watched the fight on TV, while Ma Hu, still in prison, listened to the updates on the radio. Both were deeply worried about whether Su Mu could turn the tide against the world champion. Soon, the bell rang for the second round. The match grew even fiercer. Once again, Su Mu found himself on the defensive, cornered by his opponent's relentless attacks. Just as he was on the verge of giving up, Su Mu remembered the moments when Tenghui trained him, pushing him to endure and fight back. With only 30 seconds left in the round, Su Mu managed to break free from his opponent's hold. Summoning all his strength, Su Mu launched a counterattack, landing a series of powerful blows. In the end, Su Mu achieved a knockout victory. From the stands, Tenghui watched with immense pride. The street kid who once had no future was now a world champion. Quietly, Tenghui left the stadium, stepping outside to enjoy a well-deserved cigar. Moral lesson from the story: stealing might get you a quick meal, but martial arts will teach you how to kick life back instead of rocks at trucks. Just remember, even fake fights can lead to real fame or real trouble.